a GDI consulting and training company supplier assessment practice webinar, How to Factually Evaluate Critical Supplier Performance and Risks, a proprietary webinar developed by Alan G. Dunn, copyright GDI Consulting and Training Company 2009, all rights reserved. Good morning, my name is Alan Dunn, and I'm here today to present how to factually evaluate critical supplier performance and risks and ask the question, is your supply chain at risk? Before we get started, I'd like to say a few words about GDI Consulting and Training Company. For over 15 years, GDI professionals have provided practical, fact-based solutions to business and managerial problems in manufacturing and distribution industries. Our professionals focus mainly on these industries and have developed a reputation as one of the most innovative and hardest working group of professionals in these industries. If you'd like to learn more about GDI Consulting and Training, please go to www.gdiconsult.com. I'd also like to mention that GDI has a unique supplier assessment practice. This comprehensive practice utilizes a structured, fact-based methodology that clinically assesses the performance of your company's significant and critical material suppliers by quantifying up to 19 categories of risks that may directly impact your company's performance. And again, if you'd like to know more about our unique supplier assessment practice, please go to www.gdiconsult.com as well as listen to the rest of this program. A couple of housekeeping issues that we need to address before we get started. On the desktop or on your computer desktop, you have a panel that's broken into 3 subpanels. The top subpanel indicates who the presenters are. I believe I'm probably listed there. It does not list the names of the attendees, although I assure you there are plenty of attendees from many states, and in fact I noticed from several different countries. So we have a very nice turnout today, particularly with the international crowd. You can close this top subpanel if you wish to reduce the clutter on your desktop. The middle subpanel is where all the information about this program is listed, the dial-in phone numbers for the audio, as well as the internet address for the actual program itself. I would recommend you keep this on your desktop just in case you get cut off and you can quickly get back into the program. And then the last section of the program, or of this box, is where we have the questions and answers. In this part of the panel, please record all your questions as we go along. Send them anytime during this program. As we get towards the end of the program, I will start answering the questions. And then after that, if there's any questions we didn't get to, we'll certainly email them back, and we'll copy everybody on both the questions and the answers. So I appreciate you filling in those questions as we go along. Don't wait to the end. Do it as we progress. Also, when this program is done within a few days, a copy of this webinar, complete with the audio track, instructor annotations, questions, and answers, will be made available on the GDI website at www.gdiconsult.com. I might also suggest, if anybody is interested in making this presentation in their company to their colleagues or executives, feel free to contact us via email. You can call me or email me directly at agdunn@gdiconsult.com, and we'll send you a PDF that you can use in internal presentation or internal presentations. So that should help you to sell some of these ideas. As I indicated earlier, I'm your presenter. I've been in the consulting business for nearly 30 years. For the last 15, I've run GDI Consulting and Training Company. I've also founded the Manufacturing Executive Institute, which is a training and publishing organization located in Corona, California. I'm also one of the founders of Dunkirk Governance Specialists, a consulting firm headquartered in New York City that focuses exclusively on board of director issues faced by privately owned companies, non-public companies. In addition to this, I've been a workshop leader and presenter at the California Institute of Technology's Executive Center, where I've taught multi-day programs in implementing activity-based costing, cost reductions, business process innovation, implementing performance measurements, and successful global business operations. And I'm also the recipient of the National Association of Corporate Directors 2007 Board Member of the Year Award, an award that I'm particularly proud of for its honoring of in this case me, for my work on private company boards of directors. So I've been particularly happy to have that award. Let's talk about the purpose of this program. The program is going to address 4 really important issues. The first is we're going to try to discuss why most supplier evaluations do not provide adequate risk mitigation. We're going to try to address why companies that think they have supplier evaluations don't really have them or don't have them in a self-sustaining process. Second, we're going to talk about why supplier evaluations need to be taken seriously, and particularly in light of the globalization of the supply chains, why this is becoming a huge issue. Third, we're going to try to develop an understanding of why supplier evaluations have to be constructed with approached with a well-constructed methodology. We can't just visit suppliers anymore, especially the foreign suppliers. We have to go to their sites with a very structured methodology for understanding everything that's important about those particular suppliers. And finally, we want to understand why most organizations need help to execute thorough risk mitigating performance measurements. We have come to the conclusion that most companies do not have the internal resources to perform these types of assessments. That's why we started the supplier assessment practice within GDI. Not just because it's a business opportunity, but because the supplier assessments that many of our clients, quality assurance and procurement people were doing, were missing the mark by a mile. They weren't really getting at what the real risks were with that supplier in India, or that supplier in Asia, China, or that supplier in Eastern Europe. So we built a methodology a number of years ago off of the back of our methodology we use for operational due diligence during corporate acquisitions. And we've tailored that and modified that and improved that to where we can go into suppliers now, and we can get, in a relatively short period of time, we can get a very detailed understanding of their performance and where the risks of that performance lie. So today's agenda is going to follow much of what I've just talked about. Is going to follow 6 steps. First, why critical suppliers need to be periodically evaluated, and how we approach this. And other companies approach it differently, but I think that for the listeners, when they hear how we approach it, they're going to notice it's a common sense approach, and they can then weigh the different approaches. 3, we also are going to share with you what we look for during the evaluation process. As I indicated before, we have identified 19 areas of risk that a supplier creates for our client companies, and we're going to talk about what we look for within those 19 categories. We're going to talk about what deliverables from an evaluation should be. It shouldn't just be a one-page trip report. There's a lot of details that should come out of one of these evaluations. We'll also talk about how much time and effort it takes to perform appropriate levels of supplier assessments, and then we'll talk about costs associated with doing this. How much does it really cost? So let's get into section 1, why critical suppliers need to be evaluated formally on a periodic basis. A number of years ago, Harris Interactive did a survey. It was commissioned by Johnston, a Rhode Island-based global commercial industrial property insurer. They were concerned about the values of properties, particularly manufacturing and distribution properties around the world. So they went to 600 financial executives and asked them to identify the top risks that impacted their company's primary revenue drivers. Not looking at profits, looking at revenue drivers. About 25% of the respondents were from North American companies. 19 of those were based overseas, so they were domestic operating but foreign-owned organizations. And what they discovered amongst all of them, when you add them all together, both domestic and foreign, they discovered that supply chain issues took about 25% of the share of mind of these financial executives. They surely were concerned about regulatory issues and pricing fluctuations and labor issues and disasters and breakdown issues, but the biggest component they worried about today was supply chain problems. And this should not be a surprise, because supply chains have now globalized, and it's getting more and more difficult to manage those because of all the complexities and distances and languages involved. So then we ask the question, why does your company need to do a better job of supplier valuation? There's 5 big reasons. 1, suppliers are simply farther away than ever before. You just can't get in a car or in a small jet or a small plane and go and see them. It's a long journey. It's a long journey to Eastern Europe or to Asia. There's less inventory in the pipeline. We've worked for years to move to eliminate buffers in our inventory pipelines, and as a result of that, we have less room for error when there's a shortage. Suppliers are harder to get to know, again, because of their distances and because of their languages and because of their cultures and because of their business norms. The business norms become a fairly significant issue because different companies react to problems differently. Lead times have gotten longer because a lot of material is sitting on boats on the ocean, and the JIT, as I indicated earlier, the buffers have been eliminated as a result of just-in-time inventory management. And the results, ultimately, if we don't manage those 5 reasons or issues well, the results from poor performing supply chain always fall into one or all 3 of these. Either we have delivery reliability problems, which we typically will buy our way out with safety stock, unfortunately, or we have cost problems. In other words, cost of material escalates, which gives us a margin squeeze. Or the third is that we receive poor quality material, which again oftentimes results in extra safety stock and extra expediting costs and extra sorting costs, etc. So what's important now is that we have to move to a world of proactive and thorough due diligence. That's from the mergers and acquisition world, due diligence of critical suppliers. And this is a new necessity in the global supply world where distances can be great, supply complexities can be even greater, and the consequences of poor supply can be devastating to the bottom line. And we have plenty of examples of where that devastation has occurred. A few years back, a couple of professors at Georgia Institute of Technology did a study looking at supply chain disruptions that could seriously impact long-term shareholder value. They were primarily concerned about shareholder value, profitability, and share price volatility with a heavy emphasis on share price or share value. And what they discovered when companies had a major disruption in supply chain, one that caused a drop in revenue, they discovered that sales growth, not sales volume, but sales growth, ultimately dropped about 7% as a result of the disruptions on average. And those same companies experienced about 11% higher cost of goods and about 14% higher inventory as they tried to buy their way out to make sure this never happened again. Most importantly, and highlighted in yellow on this slide, is that these companies experienced a 10.5% on average decrease in stock value the year following this disruption, and about a 2%, a little bit less than 2% the year after that. So counting the year of the disruption and these 2 years, you have this 3-year window that a major disruption can create. And we can talk about the amount of market capitalization that disappears when you have a 10.5% reduction. We can talk about what happens, the cash that disappears when you have 11% higher COGS and 14% higher inventory. These are all issues that ultimately hit the shareholder value equation. In the year after the disruption, we saw share price volatility swing about 13.5% more than it did compared to the volatility in the year before the disruption. So disruptions clearly have a debilitating impact on performance, and companies often don't recover from these disruptions quickly. So companies are going to continue to operate for a year or two at a lower performance level as a result of these disruptions. So let's try to move on to how GDI approaches supplier evaluations. We approach it much the same way we've approached operational due diligence when there is hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of dollars on the line for our clients who are acquiring other manufacturing entities. So we took that same level of seriousness and that same level of sense of urgency, and we applied it to building a methodology that can get into a supplier and can do a thorough due diligence or a supplier assessment quickly. And all of those factors have to be involved for a good supplier assessment. It has to be fact-based, it has to be methodology-driven, and it has to be reasonably quick. All those factors have to, or all those characteristics have to be addressed to be successful at supplier assessment. So our methodology is very fact-based. It's proven, it's tested. We've done it many, many times. We execute the process in about 3 weeks. So when a client calls us and says, can you go to Pell and Bang and can you take a look at a critical supplier that I have over there that I have some concerns with, it takes us a week to gear up, and then we spend a week here in the United States doing all the analysis we can do from a distance. Then we load 2 to 3 people up on an airplane, and we head to Pell and Bang, and we spend 6 days in their factory or factories if they're all close and they're one kind of contiguous sort of an operation. And we spend the time, very long days, 6 days, going through their operations, executing diagnostic routine after diagnostic routine. Excuse me. We execute these processes anywhere in the world. We look at 19 specific areas of risk, which I will share with you in a few minutes. The ultimate result of all of this is that we make recommendations on what the terms and conditions should be going forward with that particular supplier. And so we are going to spend some time identifying at the end or developing at the end what we think the terms and conditions should be given the risks that we've assessed at that particular supplier. So if the supplier has some reliability issues, we may suggest that they keep 30 days of inventory on this side of the ocean to account for those delays. If we conclude that they don't do a good job of preventive maintenance, we may put in a term or a condition that suggests that they have to implement a preventive maintenance program on specific machines in their factory and maybe also keep some inventory on their nickel on our side of the ocean. And so we will come up with what we think the terms and conditions would be that would mitigate the risks that we assess. So the first step is really to figure out the risks. The second step is to figure out how to counteract those risks. We also provide an improvement path for the supplier. So we provide, or out of our whole process, we build a document that our client can then give to the supplier and review with them that suggests specifically how they should improve if they want to keep the partnering relationship going. And finally, as I indicated earlier, this is all modeled after due diligence from the M&A world. And this really works because it's, again, as I said, it's fact-based, methodology-driven, and it's done reasonably quickly, a 3-week period of time. So what do? Well, we take a look at each of those 19 categories of risks that I talked about, and we might, let's say, for example, one of the categories of risk is their production planning and scheduling, and we look at how effective they are at that. There's probably 8 or 9 diagnostic routines that we do in order to come to have enough data to come to a conclusion and to draw a reasonable opinion of how risky supply, quality, and costs are relative to that production planning process that they have. And then we score it. And we score it either from substantial risk all the way to no risk. In this case, the chart, this is the risk continuum that we use for each of the 19 is scored as a moderate risk. And when we're all done, we then take all 19 and we build a composite score that describes the risk to your total supply chain relative to the risk of delivering material on time, delivering quality material, and the ability of the supplier to actually drive costs down in order to help you drive your costs down. What do we look for is the big question. Everybody wants to know, well, when you go into a factory, what do you look for, Alan? Well, I'm going to share that with you. Here are the 19 categories of risk. Roughly the first 12 or 13 are what we call the basic level. This is the minimal level of information you should have on your critical suppliers. Not every supplier, but your critical suppliers. And we'll define critical in a few minutes. Any supplier that has economic viability issues. So if you were buying product from Delphi, you would say they have economic viability issues, and you would have to address that. And so we have a series of diagnostic routines to understand and to come to an opinion on their economic viability. The second category that we look at is suppliers' production processes, methods, tooling, equipment, and facilities. Basically, this is the factory in and by itself, including the equipment. So we look at the general condition of the factory. We look at how modern the production processes are. We look at the methods they're using. We look at the quality of their tooling, the equipment. We look at the facility layout and the design, and we provide an opinion on how effective and how good this facility is, and does it contribute, how much does it contribute to the risks of poor delivery, poor quality, and inability to reduce costs. We then move on to the product quality. How do they manage their product quality? Are they proactive or are they reactive? Do they use statistical process techniques, or do they just use sorting at the end of the line sort of techniques? And again, we score them from risky to no risk on that continuum. Their planning and scheduling capabilities, their ability to plan and schedule, and all that's around the planning and scheduling, including the people. Each one of these, by the way, we look at the people who actually do the work. We look at their skill sets as well. In inventory management, we look at how they manage inventory, lead time, lot size, safety stock, order multiples, a little bit of how they use their system. Look at how they manage demands, how they forecast, how they apply forecast error. We're looking at all of the issues that need to be addressed relative to how well inventory is managed. By the way, including inventory record accuracy if they have a perpetual inventory record. Number 6, we look at the supplier's purchasing management capabilities. How do they run their purchasing organization? Is it a bunch of clerks just buying by, PO after PO, or is it annualized agreements with vendor-managed inventories, etc.? So we look at the sophistication, and we look at the specifics of how they manage those suppliers. Number 7, we look at how easy it is for customers to do business with this supplier. Do they integrate well? Do they commingle, or do they get involved with their customers very deeply? Will they stock inventory on your shelf? Will they come in and manage the inventories? Do they like to have access to your master schedule? Are they flexible? Do they have do they have abilities to integrate with your environment, or are they like some of those large 1-800 companies where for every issue there's a different 800 number and you get thrown on a voicemail system that goes in the never-ending loop? So we look at, that's all about integrating with the customers, or how easy it is to do business with them. We also look at how they manage their logistics and how they manage their transportation. Does product get done and sit on their dock for a week before they're able to get it out? How do they handle their foreign documentation, shipping documentation, bills of lading? How do they do their truck loading? How do they manage the transportation and shipment? And how do they find the lowest cost but highest quality solutions in logistics? We also look at the customer service capabilities, closely aligned with number 7, the integration capabilities. But these are specific issues on how they deal with your specific company, their customer service, you being the customer, how it works, and what can be done better. Number 10 is a very important one. Throughout this organization, we look at the supplier's leadership and critical support team capabilities. We look at the quality of these people. We look at their background. We look at their ability to solve problems. We look at their passion. We look at their curiosity. We look at their innovation. We try to get a sense, can these people solve complex supply chain problems? If you have a problem, you have an issue that needs to be addressed. More than once, we have built into recommended terms and conditions wording around improving the quality of the people in the supply chain organization. Number 11 is an important one. We look at the catastrophe planning. We look at 2 primary areas in catastrophe planning of a supplier. One is the catastrophe planning of production. What happens if the factory breaks, burns down, something happens to it? Is there another factory, a sister supplier? Is there some way that product can still be put out there? or do they back it up with a lot of inventory and have a lot of extra inventory just in case? The second catastrophe area we look at is in information management. How do they manage their backups? How can they stay up and running if their information system fails? So we take a look at that whole process. And then number 12, which is really probably the end of the basic, although sometimes we add 13 in there, but probably the end of the basic analysis. Since we're looking throughout the whole organization, from economics to purchasing to materials to manufacturing, we ought to be able to develop what we call a should cost understanding. Now, the supplier may say that the material content of something they produce for you is $1, and the labor content is $2, and the burden content is $5, for a total of $8. They may say that, but when we get done looking at all these issues that I've previously mentioned, might come to a conclusion that it's really $6 with some different breakout. And so ultimately we can come back and say that their cost accounting system is incorrect, and it wouldn't be the first company whose cost accounting system was incorrect. And then we identify what we think it really should be costing at their organization. Then once we factor in all of the improvements as a result of the risks, if they fixed all these risks or poor performing areas, then we can generally factor in what things could cost. And we refer to that as the could cost analysis. And so the should cost and could cost are naturally derived from detailed analysis. And if there's any large reason or any significant reason to do a formal structured supplier assessment rather than the loosey-goosey, let's get on a plane, go over there, have lunch and visit with them for 2 or 3 days sort of assessment, it's this. It's that when we walk out of these factories, we understand the real cost structure, irrespective of how it's being reported internally. In more than one case, we've known more about their cost than they know, and we consider that incredibly valuable information for our client. Then you get beyond this, and now there's other issues that we can look at. We can look at their process and product engineering capabilities. For some companies, that's mandatory, especially where we ask them to develop the manufacturing process or to even help develop the product itself. We also can look at the integrity and information sharing capabilities, the quality of their information system and how it's managed and how it works, not just for them, but for their suppliers and customers. We can also drill down on what we call the supplier capabilities. That is, look at very deeply how they manage their suppliers. It's kind of a mini supplier assessment, everything we've looked at done at another level down at their suppliers. We also can take a look at impacting supplier legal issues. These issues are the things that could create real problems. Anytime we have a company that's got serious economic viability issues or serious product quality issues, we tend to encourage the clients to do number 16, which is look at the legal issues, because there's probably some out there. We also might look at the human resource issues. We've had a couple of our clients that want to know something about the human management side of the suppliers, and they want to know if the suppliers are running sweatshops or not, and some companies have policies against that. So the human resource issues we look at, as well as we look at that in what we call the corporate citizenship side of the business, and how good of a corporate citizen are they, including their pollution, their carbon footprint, their waste streams, etc. And then lastly, some companies, not many, but some companies have asked us to look at how a company is governed, and that really means looking at their board of directors and looking at how they manage the strategy and the goal and the oversight of the company. Companies that were supplied by WorldCom or supplied by Enron, they had some hardships too, and somebody should have looked at those companies' governance processes, and they would have said that's probably not a supplier that we want to have. So ultimately, there are 3 levels, as I indicated. The first level is what we call the minimum assessment. Whoops, my pen's going a little crazy here. The minimum assessment. The minimum assessment, level 1, is really about the first 12. Level 2 assessment is everything except for probably the last 2 issues, and I'll show you some detail on that in just a minute. And then level 3 is everything that's left over. Okay, so the minimal level is level 1 of the comprehensive supplier performance and risk assessment is the bulk of the process. So we say that there's 12 or 13. In this case, I've said there's 13. Here's what we look at. There's over 70 diagnostic routines in a level 1 assessment. We're looking at economic viability, their ability to meet quality, delivery reliability, and cost targets. We're also looking at the supplier's management and infrastructure. It requires a site visit and full analysis of functional performance, and does result in a should cost and a could cost sort of an analysis that comes mandatorily out of this. So I'm not going to read all the details, but over on the side over here, you can, if I can find my pointer here. Over here, I'm going to find it. Whoops. My pointer's kind of small here today. The supplier background information, we gather that as soon as we talk to a client who needs an evaluation. We look at the supplier's industry, their brands, their market share, their strengths and weaknesses, pull all the Edgar filings, everything that we can. We also try to understand our client's annual spend with the supplier, and we try to understand the supplier partnership agreement as it currently stands. Then we take a look at the economic viability. In economic viability, you can see there's a dozen analytics in there. We look at the balance sheet, the profitability, working capital, cash management, prospects for future revenue growth, revenue sources and concentration. We gather up all their audit reports if they have any. We look at their capital spending history, look for liens and filings, currency exchange issues, and the off-balance sheet liability issues, and more. All of that is done in the basic assessment when we just take a look at economic viability. Then you can see we start to go into all the other categories. So for the first one, up on the top left-hand corner, up here, we have the assessment of the supplier's production processes. We look at their manufacturing technology and their equipment. There's a couple sub-diagnostics there where we actually look at the age of the equipment. We take a census of the equipment. We try to get a sense of its maintenance and its quality. We look at production tooling and fixtures, the process, the methods, the material flow, factory housekeeping, equipment, and facility maintenance, etc. And then we move on to how they manage quality. And so over here we look at how they manage quality in terms of the cost to quality elements. We have our own cost to quality analytic that we run. We get their finished goods quality management process. This is inspection-based or proactive. Same thing with work in process. And then we take a look at all their quality assurance and control procedures. We have another series of robust diagnostics on the manufacturing planning and scheduling area, also on the inventory management area, the supplier purchasing management area, and the supplier's ability to integrate with customers. Now, on that one, we take a look at organization linkage and communication channels. They communicate via email, or is there monthly phone calls, daily phone calls? How is it done? We look at the performance indicators. We look at their sales force talent. Is their sales force technically inclined? There's a number of our clients where the sales force they are in fact engineers, and it's very technical sales. So we take a look at that because that feeds right into customer service. And then you can see the rest of them. We get down to the logistics, the customer service, the leadership, and the catastrophe planning. And then the final result is the supplier's delivered cost. And that's important because what we do in the supplier's delivered cost is we figure out what the annual spend is, and then we figure out the capacities, utilizations, and efficiencies so we can understand the cost of underutilization of their fixed and semi-fixed assets. We look at what's driving non-value-added behaviors. We look at significant cost drivers of the business. We look at, and then we calculate the should cost and the could cost of this business. And once we do that, we've now completed the basic assessment. And that's a lot. That's 13, in this case, 13 and never less than 12 categories. If you want to go to the next level, which we refer to as the comprehensive assessment, we have to add 2 more assessment methodologies to this, or I'm sorry, 5 more to this, One is we have to look at the product and process engineering capabilities. We have to look at the supplier's data integrity capabilities. So if you look at the data integrity, the second green box on the right, you'll see we look at physical inventory reconciliations. We look at independent demand error. We look at their cost accounting system, their variance reporting and elemental cost tracking, their monthly production reporting, their defect rate, their bill of material accuracy, their production routers, flows, setups, runs, and operational reporting. That's a lot. But that's why it takes 3 people, 3 weeks, nonstop practically, to do these assessments. These 3-week assessments are what most companies could do or would do over a course of about 3 to 4 months. But nobody has the time to do that, nor do they have the energy to wait that long for a report. So we blitz it using the same logic we saw in Kaizen Blitz, with highly skilled people with strong methodologies, and we create this analysis because it's methodology driven very quickly. And then here are the last of the 3 for this level of assessment. We look at the supplier, the legal proceedings, and the human resource issues. If somebody wanted us to look at what we call the comprehensive and progressive, this is where we're going to take a look at the supplier's corporate citizenship and their corporate governance. The corporate citizenship is we're going to look at their sustainability programs, their waste stream, their safety records, their environmental practices, their employment practices, and their relationship with the local community. That's what we mean by being a corporate citizen. Sometimes our clients don't want to have a supplier that's not a good corporate citizen. And in terms of corporate governance, we look at the structure of the board of directors and the ownership structure of the business and how they link goal setting with strategies, and then any trouble they're in perhaps with the SEC if they're a publicly traded company. So this level 3 assessment is everything we've talked about plus these 2. So what's the deliverable? Well, there's 4 books that come out of this assessment. So let's just walk again through the timeline. On day 1, a client calls us and says, we need you to do an assessment of a company over in Asia. That week, we spend on the phone talking to that supplier, gathering a lot of information remotely, and we always generally get the information we need. The second week, we spend in our country here in the U.S. doing our analysis of all that distance acquired information. The next week, we're on site. The week after that, we're back here doing all the pulling together of the data, drawing the conclusions. Sometimes there's a little bit of going back and forth on the telephone to solve a problem. Sometimes we'll leave a person in country. If we don't think we have everything by the time we're done, we'll leave them there for an extra week. And at the end of all of this, we have 4 books. The first book is an executive summary, typically 25 to 30 pages long, and it identifies each of the 19 risks and where this particular supplier falls on each of those 19 risks in terms of the continuum that we showed earlier, from highly risk to no risk. And then also there's a generic summary, and there's even in the executive summary the suggestion for the new terms and conditions going forward with this particular supplier. We also separate out the economic analysis into a second book, book 2, and we provide that to our client's CFO. Invariably, the economic analysis is done under the strictest of non-disclosure agreements, and we don't think it's in anybody's best interest to have the economic analysis of a supplier laying around any of our clients. We believe that needs to be taken in possession by the CFO of our client, and then our client has that. There's only one copy of that because that's pretty proprietary and pretty good information. And we usually have to make arrangements with the supplier that this information will not be shared beyond the CFO anyways. So that particular analysis book is spun out separately. The third book is the complete details of everything. So if there was to figure out the production scheduling and planning, if there were 7 diagnostic routines, the results of all 7 diagnostic routines would be in book 3, along with the 5 for inventory management and the 7 for capacity management, etc. So book 3 is really what we do, and we pull book 1, 2, and 4 out of book 3. Book 4 is the Unbiased Supplier Improvement Plan. This is we pull again this out of Book 3, and this is everything that we want or we think our client should tell their supplier. So Book 1 tells our client's senior executives what they should do in terms of risk management on a particular supplier. Book 2 addresses the issues of economic viability with that supplier. Book 3 is all the details behind Book 1 and 2, and Book 4 is pulled out as a separate document that our client can then sit down with the supplier and review. Sometimes worth those reviews, but it's not essential. We believe our clients, in order to build the partnering relationship, have to be able to sit down with their suppliers and have to review the improvement opportunities of those suppliers, because that naturally segues into a discussion of cost savings and cost sharing, or savings sharing, I should say. And so it's really important that we act kind of as the speechwriter, if you will, providing that summary of improvement opportunities for that supplier. Remember, we already understand what the cost could be, and the mission of Book 4 is to make it clear to the supplier what they need to do in the future based on this analysis. The bottom line of a formal supplier evaluation is that it's got to be a proactive and quantifying mechanism. It has to provide clear evidence of your supplier's strengths, weaknesses, and cost reduction opportunities. It has to provide your company with clear information to negotiate better prices, and even more importantly, really, is better terms and conditions. So a formal supplier assessment should result in reduced spending, improved risk profiles with their suppliers, much improved factory productivity as a result of reliability improvements, and everything that goes along with that, including the improved efficiencies and supply chain partnerships. The final deliverable always includes clear risk mitigating recommendations for specific modifications to the terms and conditions between your company and your supplier. And this is our recommendation. So let's talk a little bit about time and effort. Once we get the call, it takes us a week to mobilize, but during that week, we're getting information from the client. So the first real week of the engagement, we're off-site, usually in our offices, doing preparation and off-site analysis. The second week, we're on-site, in-country, using all of our structured observations and diagnostic routines to address all that which could create risks to delivery reliability, delivered quality, and the supplier's economic viability, which leads ultimately to their ability to manage costs. And then the last week is 1 week of off-site, again back usually in our office or some neutral place, depending upon where our consultants are coming from, drawing conclusions from the data gathering and analytic efforts. Our final report is developed and presented and reviewed with your management, either in person, via web conference, or just providing you a report. We typically like to do it in person. So then we have the issue, can your company afford to perform supplier assessments? And I'm asked this all the time. The real question, I think, is can you afford to not do or perform supplier assessments in today's global supply world with all those risks that we talked about before? The answer is you can't afford to do this with all suppliers, but you have to do it with the critical suppliers. So as I promised earlier, we have to define a critical supplier. So here's our definitions, characteristics of critical suppliers. Any global supplier with annual spend greater than $2 million, or any critical supplier with long-term or erratic lead times. Any significant sole supplier, especially one with difficult global logistics requirements, or any supplier with significant historical problems in delivery reliability and or quality. These all are reasons for doing these. And any critical supplier that can cause a significant supply chain disruption for any reason at all has to be looked at. And any critical underperforming supplier, I probably should add that you can't easily replace and has caused significant damage, you probably need to do that. Any critical global supplier that has experienced major shifts in management, governance, operating environment, customer base, supplier base, or ownership should be looked at. So If you have a supplier and you're 20% of their business and another company is 60 or 80% of their business and they lose that customer, you need to go and take a look at them because they may not be economically viable anymore for you. If you have a supplier and that supplier is sold, and that supplier is sold to a company that may not think the same way that you want them to think, you may need to go do an assessment. Any supplier that needs to drive down costs in order to remain a supplier of yours, and that is any critical supplier, that's, obviously you got to look at that. And then any supplier that you feel needs to be second sourced, you probably also want to take a look at if it's a critical supplier and a large supplier. People always ask me, what do we charge for this and what should it cost internally? Well, I'll just give you an example. What we charge is on this document in front of you. This is the 2009-2010 price list. So if you just take a look at Asia and India, if you wanted to do a basic assessment, it's $57,150. If I can get my pen up there. Here it is right here. If you want to do a basic assessment, that's what it's going to cost. That includes all expenses, travel, 3 consultants, all presentations, etc. It's a flat fee. So when you call, it's easy. You know what it's going to cost. And we have clients that just call us regularly and say, I need you to head to Asia, or I need you to head to the Middle East, or I need to head to Oceania. That would be Australia, New Zealand, etc. We don't get a lot sending us to Africa. We've had one send us to the African continent, the northern part of the continent. And those get to be a little bit more expensive just because of travel. But the point is that there are 3 people involved in these assessments. They take 3 weeks. They're full-time efforts to do it. I challenge any company to be able to send 3 of their own employees on an equivalent process and do it for these prices. Now, we can do it because we've done it. We own the methodology. We own the proprietary diagnostic routines. We have this down pat. We've done this, so we know how to move forward on this, so there's no second guessing. And so, from the time you call us to the time it's done, it's 4 weeks. It's about 3 weeks of hard work. There's that week up front just getting ready. So, but 4 weeks or less is all it really takes to really understand that. Most companies can't even make a decision about what to do with a supplier in less than 4 weeks. So we think that's a reasonable time frame to take to do a quality due diligence on a supplier. I promised you earlier I'd talk about some disruptions, and so here are some case studies that I'd like to share with you. We'll take the first one. In 1995, in Kobe, Japan, there was an earthquake that destroyed virtually all of Toyota's, well, I shouldn't say destroyed, but all of their plants were affected and had to shut down as an inability to get brake shoes from one sole source supplier that was, in fact, destroyed. The factory collapsed. So that's the disruption. What caused the disruption to the right is they had trimmed their brake shoe supply chain to one supplier without fully understanding the risks. And they could have managed, to the right farther again, they could have managed this if they understood the catastrophe management capabilities at that supplier. This should have been done, or should have been assessed before a supply agreement was negotiated. Now notice here that we rated this as a manageable risk. This was clearly a manageable risk. When you go to a sole source supplier, you need to know what their catastrophe backup is, and that's manageable. It shouldn't. The timing of a disaster may be a surprise, but the backup catastrophe planning should never be a surprise. And so we think that's a manageable risk. The second example at the bottom of the page, in 2000 and 2001, the entire worldwide electronics industry experienced a shortage of tantalum capacitors because a leading PC manufacturer started hoarding these devices. All at the same time, new applications that required tantalum capacitors in cell phones were being developed. And this company, by the way, this was Selectron. Selectron was forced to shut down an entire production line, or a series of product lines actually, in the contract manufacturing business. What caused this, the middle column, is the supply effectively dried up overnight because they didn't understand the worldwide growing need for one of their critical components. This forced them to redesign their products that they were making for their clients. that took a capacitor that was 25 cents and had to replace it with the next best item, which was $1.25, a five-fold increase in that particular component's cost. Now, Selectron failed to understand the capacitor industry's worldwide volume ramp-up. If they understood this, they could have began their redesign efforts sooner when they had time on their side and didn't have to reach out for the first available component they could find. Perhaps they could have discovered an alternate plan that would have been less expensive. Now, we would have said this was a critical risk because it's driven by external issues, but still, there's some level of manageability to it. So the question here is how to quickly qualify an alternate component design and source. Some more disruptions. In 2000, Ericsson failed to ship in excess of $1 billion in cell phones because of a fire at one of their semiconductor suppliers' plants, and it disrupted their entire inbound materials supply chain and then therefore their production rates. $1 billion of failed shipments. Imagine being the person responsible for that. I'll bet that's an involuntary career move. The cause of this is they trimmed their supplier base and did not establish appropriate safety stocks to buffer at emergencies. They also didn't insist that their supplier maintain inventories in buildings separate from manufacturing. Manufacturing is where you get the fires, because especially in semiconductors with xylene and all kinds of other nasty and flammable chemicals. The risks could have been managed had Ericsson understood the supplier's internal manufacturing points of disruption. If they did, they could have rationally determined the safety stocks needed to adjust for the quantified risks. And again, they could have said, have some safety stock a mile down the road, and that would have solved $1 billion problem. Notice that's at the middle to low end of manageable risks. That's not a big issue or big risk. The question that should have come out of the assessment is how to best deploy safety stock inventories in this environment. At the bottom, we have Siemens Automation. They made gas chromatographs. They had to shut down an entire factory and lose over 2 weeks of production because their power supplier vendor was suffering cash flow problems and couldn't pay their downstream suppliers. That in turn led to shortages of critical components to their factory, and they ultimately missed deliveries. So in the middle column, Siemens Automation reduced its power supplier base to 2 suppliers. And this is a really important lesson. The largest supplier had economic viability issues. The smaller of the suppliers had ramp-up difficulties because they'd never been tested. They'd never been stress tested. The result was a significant and lingering shortage of parts, which ultimately resulted in market share loss. So how could they better manage that? Well, they failed to understand the weaknesses of each of these suppliers. One was financially in trouble. The other didn't have the ability to ramp up quickly. Had they thoroughly assessed these, they would have adjusted safety stocks and perhaps even given the smaller supplier a bit more business in order to provide them with an incentive to scale up their production capabilities and to invest some more capital. And again, we see this as the medium to low end of moderate risk. Fully manageable, easily addressable, as long as it's understood in advance. So the wisdom from all of this information and the wisdom from some seasoned supply chain veterans that we've talked to is this: even moderate or manageable risks can shut you down if the risks are not identified in advance and properly managed. We've got to manage those. We can't just assume that they're going to manage themselves. In a global supply chain where the distances are long and the complexities are great, this is not a small task, but it starts with understanding the risks. Now it's time for questions and answers. I see the first question that we received from Bob in Tulsa today is a question about how do you get financial information from private companies when they're reluctant to give it. That's a very good question, Bob. Every webinar or program we do on supplier assessment, we get asked that question. I always have a discussion with the owner and or the CFO or the president, and the discussion goes something like this. It starts with, our client would not have hired us to do an assessment of you if they didn't want to keep you as a supplier. Why would they spend this kind of money just to get rid of you? Our job, if they wanted to get rid of you, they would just get rid of you. They don't need us to tell them the reasons why they should get rid of you. So they've asked us to do this assessment because they're truly concerned about the risks of their business. Oh, by the way, a lot of our public companies are asking us to do these because under Section 409 of Sarbanes-Oxley, they have to assess some level of risk for their key suppliers, particularly if they can impact revenues. And so we tell the private company owners or executives this, and then we talk to them about what we're looking for. We go through the economic viability assessment, and we try to tell them what we're looking for. Now, if they say, well, when all said and done, we're just not going to give you the financials, for example. And our response is always, if you don't give us the financials, that category, that one category of the 19 categories, we will have to assess as risky. I mean, anytime you don't have information, you have to assess the performance as risky. And that's what we will do. Now, if you think the other 18 categories you'll compensate and make up for that, then that's your choice. But you know what? We can look at your financials. We can sit with you and go over them if you don't want to physically allow us to take them with us. And we can go through and we can look at this assessment and do our liquidity analysis and do our cash flow analysis, because that's really what we're concerned about. We're not even concerned about profitability as much as we're concerned about cash flow and liquidity. In other words, the lifeblood, the blood of your business. That's what we're really concerned about. And then when we're done, we'll share with you our perspectives on all of this. And we have never yet failed to get information, even from closely held private companies. Now, we've had cases where they don't give us P&Ls and they don't give us balance sheets, but we sit at the computer and we go over the numbers with their controller or their CFO, and we make our notes and take our notes. We're after an assessment. We're not after ownership of the data or having our hands on the data. There are plenty of ways to get this information, and we have always been successful as a result of that because we understand and we appreciate why they're reluctant to provide that information. We understand that, and that's, to us, is just normal. When somebody says, I don't want to give you the information, that doesn't upset us. We just, to us, it's just a normal thing, and we just got to find another avenue, and we always do. Jan from Carson, I think that's in California, she asked the question about multiple sites. Can multiple sites be done at the same time? Yeah, actually they can, and we have more than once deployed more than one team of our people, our professionals, to do multiple sites. Now, normally if the multiple sites are kind of a contiguous operation, like let's say a transmission factory where a factory on one end of town produces the cases and the factory on the other end of town produces the gears and the factory on the third end of town assembles them all together. We'll treat that as one factory that's just got some unusual logistics in between it. And it may take an extra day or two, but we'll treat that as one. Now, if one of those factories is in Asia and the other factories in Eastern Europe and the other factories in Mexico, whole different story. But that's really three completely different facilities connected by major logistics channels, and so we have to look at each of those individually. But yeah, we can combine, and we often do combine. Frank, I think it's Frank or Franklin. It's unclear where Franklin is from, but Franklin asks the question, can we do multiple different suppliers at the same time? And the answer to that question is not with the same crew, but yes, we can. So I'll have three professionals doing one supplier. We did one a couple years ago just outside of Budapest, and we actually had another one down in Prague area. Prague and Budapest aren't all that far. So we for the same client of ours, but we had to send two teams because they're completely different. Languages are different, cultures are different, everything's different. So we have to look at each of these on a case-by-case basis. But generally, our philosophy is this is an intensive process, and so we're going to have three people dedicated to a given assessment for 3 solid weeks. They are going to live, they are going to eat, they are going to breathe that assessment, just as if they were on a due diligence for an acquisition. That is their sole focus, and there's nothing else that they work on other than that. And that's the way we get these things done. The combination of the sense of urgency, the focus, and the very defined methodology that we've developed over the years of doing these and doing due diligence on mergers and acquisitions has given us the insight to be able to do these supplier assessments. That's the last question that we have here. I appreciate everybody showing up today. I appreciate everybody's interest in this subject. If you're interested in more information about how we do our supplier assessments, please go to our website at www.gdiconsult.com or email me at agdunn@gdiconsult.com, or please call me directly if you want. Call our office and ask for me, and they'll track me down. I'm more than happy to make this presentation as many times for your company or any company as I can. I'm more than happy to have phone and in-person conversations about this, because I'm very passionate about not only just about building a business of supplier assessment, which we're obviously doing, but also helping our clients to manage and mitigate these nearly out of control risks that are occurring daily in their supply chains. With that, I would like to thank you and wish you all have a good day.